Good day and a warm welcome to our Pacifictech Internal Issues Webinar for Sage 300. My name is Bill Fligg and I'm the North America Sales Manager here at Pacifictech. And with me today as well, we have Jamie Steele. He's our Business Development Manager.
Pacifictech is a global software development partner with over 20 years experience and commitment to Sage 300. With a suite of Sage 300 add-on modules, web-based connected services, mobile applications, and global private cloud hosting solutions, Pacifictech extends Sage 300 with Tier 1 capability. Pacifictech's AP procure-to-pay solutions take Sage 300 to a new level of functionality and capability. We've categorized our solutions into three groups. We have our workflow suite, which streamlines the process from procurement to payment, as well as providing a paperless document system. We have our control suite that gives visibility and auditing of personnel activity, including restricting certain activity without approvals. And we have our mobility suite giving you browser and app-based connectivity to your Sage 300 for people that do not need to be logged into the back end for requisitions and approvals. Now I'm going to hand you over to Jamie so he can give you an overview and the demo. I'll be back at the end to close things off for our questions.
Right, okay, thanks very much, Bill, and hello to everyone, and thanks for coming along to our session today. This slide is showing us our different workflow modules that we've got, and we always just go over this quickly just to make sure people are aware of the breadth of the solutions. So you can see on the left-hand side in the middle row there is purchasing workflow, which is the procurement workflow. Then in the middle is payables workflow, which is the AP automation solution. And both of these work in with workflow documents, so you can store your attachments within the Sage database. And on the right-hand side is workflow notifications. This is a very broad module, so it provides workflows on about over 20 entities within Sage 300. So those are the three different workflow modules that we develop, and up above here is PW Web, which this is our web front end, and we've also got a smartphone capability as well. So managers can do their approvals through the web or through smartphones, and also requisitioners can create requisitions through PW Web. Okay, and then just on to this next slide, which is the P2P, so the end-to-end procure-to-pay business process. So this in this green row are the modules within the main areas within any ERP system for the whole P2P process. I won't go through each of them in detail, but really the key point is on the second row here, you can see we've got workflow controls across, we've got workflows in 5 of the 6 main areas, and in receiving, we can block over receiving. So really the whole end-to-end P2P business process is controlled with our solutions. Okay, so now this next slide, so now we'll start sort of focusing a bit more on internal issues. So what this is showing, this is for non-stock items. So this is just sort of, I guess, a bit of background. So with a non-stock item, so users do the requisitions, they go through an approval process, they create a purchase order, that purchase order gets sent to the vendor. The vendor then provides the goods or the services, and so within Sage, that's then receipted and invoiced and paid. Right, so I think everyone's pretty familiar with how that works. But so this next slide is showing the processes when inventory is in play. And this, I guess, this is the way we've sort of designed our purchasing workflow and our internal issues module. So we've sort of got 2 different business processes going on in parallel. So the first one is on the left-hand side here. So this is the users that are requisitioning items out of the store. And so as the users need to have the items, they put in a request that goes through an approval process, and with the internal issues module, what that will do is once that storeroom requisition has been approved, it will create an internal issue order, and that is then available for the store's users to supply the request. Right, and so that's the users requesting the items out of the store. Then there's another process going on in parallel, which is the store's people making sure that they're carrying enough inventory to sort of meet the requirements. So this is what we call the replenishment process, and we'll look at this in more detail as well during this session. But the idea is here again that a requisition is done, and it can be automatically generated using min-max levels, and we'll look at that as well. And that requisition again goes through an approval process. Normally this will be different to this approval process. This one's normally a larger volume of smaller value items, whereas this one, if it's replenishing, it might be, you know, buying 50 or 100 items, so it might be much higher dollar value, but it creates a purchase order. So over here, it's creating an internal issue to get the items out of inventory. Here, it's creating a purchase order to get the products replenished. And then the vendor then supplies the products, and then that's receipted into stock and the invoice processed. All right, so really, yeah, it's just very important there's these two separate business processes that are sort of going along in parallel. And probably a good example that illustrates this is within the mining industry. So we've got over 100 mining companies around the world that use Sage 300 and pretty much most of our purchasing workflow suite. And internal issues is a critically key part of the whole solution. So they'll have the users out in the mine doing the operations that are requesting the items from the store, and for mining companies, what we find quite often 80 or 90% of their requisitions are storeroom requisitions, so where people are requesting inventory to be provided to them. So this, the term storeroom requisitions is a common term. There's a large volume of storeroom requisitions going on, and then in parallel, stores are then replenishing their inventory levels. So now just some of the main features of internal issues. So first of all, it supports the cost center concept. And I guess just a key thing as well, so you can run internal issues just on its own, so it doesn't require anything except the Sage inventory control module, but it does work in with purchasing workflow as well. So you can have cost centers within purchasing workflow, but if you have just internal issues on its own, then the cost centers is still supported. It builds the general ledger account codes, so that makes it easier for the users because the system builds the GL codes, supports multiple units of measures. You can put in your transactions and then save them and come back and make changes. And then we've got a couple of forms, which, you know, these are all, I guess, you know, the sort of thing you'd expect to be in there. So the internal issue order form, that's used by stores to pick the products. And then the internal issue shipment form, that's once the internal issue has been posted and then the goods are being provided to the user, then this form can accompany those items. Full support for Sage optional fields. Then we've also got returns as well, so it's a, you know, important part of the process. And this last one's an interesting one. When we first developed internal issues, we thought it would just be used for stock items, but we've actually had a number of customers and business partners ask us to have it supporting non-stock items as well. And so that's where, you know, quite often what we've heard is this is if people are, you know, doing some internal charging for some services, such as IT services, then they will process those using internal issues. All right, now a very important question. So some of you might be thinking, so Sage Inventory Control has got a transaction type in it called internal usage, and that's, you know, I believe that's quite a good transaction type in its own right. But I guess we developed this internal issues module. We developed it in 2004, and at that point, IC did not have the internal usage transaction. We sort of needed to develop internal issues at that point. Then after that, Sage brought out internal usage as part of IC, so that was, you know, really good improvement by Sage. You know, we're big fans of Sage 300, obviously. So the more the product gets enhanced, that's great. But what we just, you know, we did look at that time, does internal usage mean that our internal issues is now redundant? And we found that there's some really super important features with internal issues that are not in IC internal usage. So we've just put these up here just so that people can see them, and, you know, because it's, you know, pretty key question that you might be thinking, you know, what does this offer compared to internal usage? And so just some of the key ones, or in fact, these are all key ones, to be honest. So with our internal issues, you can have an internal issue order, and then you can have multiple shipments against that order. And so it sort of works like the order entry, you know, where you can have a sales order and multiple shipments. So our internal issues works along that same sort of philosophy, which internal usage doesn't. Our one's integrated in with purchasing workflow, like I talked about before. So you can have someone does a storeroom requisition. Once it's fully approved, it creates an internal issue order. So that's another differentiator. We can do returns, whereas internal usage can't do it. I believe this is correct. Sage might have added it in the last few versions, but I'm not aware of that. Then also our one builds the GL codes based on the cost centers, so that's a nice feature. And we're displaying the item quantities as well, which you'll see there. So these are sort of, I guess, 5 quite big differentiators. In terms of PJC integration, really both modules support PJC integration. They do it slightly differently, but at the end of the day, they both work fine with PJC, so that's all good. All right, so that's I think enough on the introduction side of things. So now we'll go and have a look at the software. So here's our Sage environment. So what I'll do first of all, so I'm logged in as someone called Stores. So the first thing that I want to show you is just how to run internal issues in a sort of a standalone mode. So you can see the module here. Just to recap again, so the only module that internal issues requires is Sage IC. So it doesn't need purchasing or anything like that. So if we look at internal issues, we've got our different folders, you know, again, following the Sage sort of structure. We've got setup reports, transactions, transaction reports. If we look under setup very quickly, if we go into our cost centers, we can just look up some cost centers there, such as marketing, and here it's got the GL overrides. We could have another one for IT, which has got a GL code of 600 there. So that's the cost centers. Then under GL codes, this is used for the building of the GL codes. So what the system does, it's very much like the IC location override within Sage itself. So here it gets the base GL code from the items category, and then it will override it with the segments from the cost center. Right, and then we've got our optional field setup. Right, so the setup side of things is not too involved in terms of options. There's a few settings here. Yeah, pretty straightforward, and then document numbering as well. All right, so what we'll do is we'll just come and look at our transactions. So this is just, you know, running in internal issues on a standalone basis. So we'll come into, so we've got our order screen, then we've got our shipment screen and our return screen. So if we come into our internal issue order and we put in our cost center, and we can put in our description, and also, yeah, you can see it's all integrated in with PJC. I don't know if I made that clear before. But let's do a non-PJC one. So put in our item number, it defaults the location from the cost center. Now we've got quite a few security options as well that you can limit what the users can modify, which for some clients that's quite a important part of it. Now you can see the requisition number field, so we'll come and look at this a bit later. So if the internal issue order is created from a requisition, this will be populated, but because I'm just entering an internal issue order directly, that field's left blank. So we'll say a quantity of 10, and just another thing down the bottom here, you can see the quantity information. So I think that's very similar to the Sage order entry, but it's quite useful being able to see the quantity in this location and across all locations. Then we've got our multiple units and measures, so just like the Sage screens. And then from the costing point of view, it uses the same costing method that is set up with an IC. So, once again, we're just leveraging as much as we can off IC or Sage in general. And okay, so we've got a quantity of 10, and then over here you can see the GL code. So this is where the system built the GL code for the users. And then the optional fields on the lines and on the header. We've also got comments on the line and the header as well. Right, and then we can do another line, obviously. So say 20 of these. And so now we can add this. And so this has now created that internal issue. I'll just take auto clear off. So it's internal issue order number 136. So that's just basically sitting there as an order for stores to supply it. Now we can ship from the screen as well. I'm not really a big fan of that. I think it's sort of my preference is to use the shipment screen to do the shipping. But some companies like to, so again, it's following very much the Sage order entry approach of letting you do processes in different screens. All right, so if we come and look at our forms now, so we'll come and look at our internal issue order. And so if we go to our one at the end, so this will be a form that can now be used by the stores department to go and pick those goods. Right, so now the person goes out, picks the goods, and what they might find, there might be 2 or 3 people might have done a request for the same item at the same time, so they might have to juggle, how much they supply to each of the users. So now they come into the shipment screen, and so this is normally done by the, by the people in the stores, and so they come in here. And so now you can see the quantity ordered, and which is the original quantity, and then the quantity on the back order. So let's say that we've located 6 of those, or we're happy to supply 6 for this order, and let's say 18 of those. Oops, typo. So it was telling me, oh yeah, it gives you an error. Yeah, right. Okay, so that's right. I think we've got a flag in there to that's configurable to prevent people over shipping. So just another control that we've added in based on user requests. All right, and we've also got a ship all button down the bottom here, just again like order entry, so that'll just ship whatever's outstanding. So here we'll do 6 and 18. So we click on the post button, and so you probably didn't see it, but what it did then is in the background, it's created the IC internal usage transaction. So this is the point where inventory is getting decremented. And this says, do you want to print the shipment form? So now this is the form that is now telling us, this is going with the goods back to the user department, saying the original quantity ordered was 10 and 20. This is what's being shipped, 6 and 18, and the back orders 4 and 2. Right, so then let's say the next day, if the users look at what there's an inventory, and they then might decide that they can then satisfy the remainder of that internal issue order. And you can see here the status as well. So you've got a status of either entered or partially shipped or completed. So now I come in here, and what I can do, let's say if stores have found the other 4 and the 2, we can click ship all, and that'll now take the quantity, whatever is remaining will now be processed, and we now hit the old post button. I won't print the shipment again. All right, so that's really internal issues, just using it standalone. If we come into the return screen, it's very straightforward. You can find your internal issue. So let's say that was the last one we did for the 4 and the 2, and then we can do a return of however many. Say we're returning 2 of these, and then we can print a return form as well. All right, so that's internal issues in a standalone mode, and we do have a number of companies that run it in that mode. Just in terms of different verticals, we've sort of talked about mining already. Another vertical that uses internal issues quite a lot is the hotel industry. Where they're taking inventory out, so they're not selling the inventory, they're consuming it as part of their business. So we've got a number of hotels that use internal issues on its own. All right, so now let's come and look at internal issues with purchasing workflow. So what I'll do is I'll log in as a requisitioner, and I'll come and do a storeroom requisition. So we come into purchasing workflow, requisition entry. So the same requisition screen as if they're buying non-stock items or services from externally. So they can put in the workflow there. Actually, I've got one here called storeroom. And so we can put on our items. Now the vendor field pops up, but that's not utilized. When it's creating an internal issue, the vendor field is ignored because it's coming from the stores. And so now we submit that, and we can see it's gone to the division manager. So obviously the whole purchasing workflow provides the approval process before the internal issue is created. So we come in as division manager. So here's our one here, 780. So we click on that, and let's just come and have a look here to see what's. So we can see it's gone to the controller, so it's for a second approval. So I'll log in as the controller. And then here we come to do our final approval. And here it is here, so we'll click on the post button. And so now that was the final approval. So now if we come over and look in the internal issues module, if we come into our internal issue orders, and we can see there's a new one here, number 137. So you can see now it's got the 10 desk lamps and the 20 bulbs, and you can see this requisition number is populated. So this is now an internal issue order that has come from purchasing workflow. So been through an approval process, then when it's fully approved, it created the internal issue order. And if we just come and look at our requisition, we go to looking at completed, and we see its status of completed. And if we come along in our grid, you can see the internal issue number. So from the requisition, you can see the internal issue order that was created, and from the internal issue, you can see the requisition that it came from. So you got the linkages both ways. And this, you can see this column here is right beside the PO number column. And so, if a requisition was for some outside services, this would be populated with the PO number. But because this is for some stock items and they've got internal issues, it's got the internal issue order number there. All right. And so just, a question there is what documents get created from an IC shipment and an IC and PJC? So that's a good question. So the shipment, it will create if it is a non-job related, it will create an IC internal usage. If it is job related, it will create a material usage within PJC. So it sort of splits off to the right place in both of those cases. With a return that's non-PJC, because IC doesn't support returns within internal usage, so therefore we have to do an IC adjustment to do the return. And on the PJC side, there is a material usage return. Let's just have a look. The internal issue shipment will create the material usage within PJC, and the internal issue return, if it's job related, or it will create a material return within PJC. Now, what we've looked at, our second area that we looked at was an internal issue transaction that was at the back end of an approval process within purchasing workflow. So now if we just can think back to our PowerPoint, in fact, let's just go back to that. If we go back to here. So really, we looked at an internal issue order, a direct internal issue order and shipment. Then we looked at this process of a storeroom requisition. Now let's look at the replenishment process. And it's not within, this is within purchasing workflow, but it's sort of goes very much hand in hand with companies like, for example, well, a lot of the mining companies, the whole replenishment process is very, very important as well. So if we come and look under here, purchasing workflow, create transactions. So we've got this function here. So within the Sage PO module, they've got a function called create POs from IC. Within purchasing workflow, we've got a corresponding function called create PRs from IC. And so what this is doing, it's very similar to, well, it's quite similar to the Sage PO function, but we've had quite a bit of feedback from users that this has got some quite good advantages, and you'll see why shortly. So we put in our workflow. So we've got a workflow called replenishment. Actually, I'll just log in as stores, as the user I should be in as. So for doing the replenishment, it's normally often someone in the stores department. So our workflow is replen, our cost center is stores, and now what we've got one option here. So we can run it for certain location and a range of item numbers, and we can include outstanding internal issues as well. So what that will mean is, without that, it looks at the minimum level from Sage IC, and then it looks at the quantity on hand, and then it does the adjustment for quantities on purchase order, and then quantities on sales orders. So it takes those into account to work out if it needs to include a suggested replenishment line. What you can also do though is include outstanding internal issue orders. So that'll treat that just like sales orders as a sort of level of demand that needs to be taken into account. I'll just leave that unticked for now, and so we'll just hit run the process button. So now what the system has done, it's gone through all of the items within IC, and it's looking at it at a location level, so location 1. And for every item, it's checked the minimum, compared with what I just said before. It's checking, is the quantity on hand below or is the quantity below the minimum. And if it is, it'll be reordering up to the maximum within reorder quantities. And so what it tells us here, it's put 3 requisition lines onto this requisition number 781, and it's also given us a warning. It's saying 1 or more items do not have a default vendor assigned. So what we'll do is we'll go and look at requisition number 781. And so here it is. So what you can see is there's this item number for desk notebooks. So it's suggested the system's worked out that we should buy 21 of these. And it's said for the desk calendar pads that it's suggested that we should buy 8 of those. And then for the bulletin boards, it suggested that we should buy 564. And so that warning that we got, it was just telling us that 1 or more lines has not got a vendor on it. So now the stores people or the purchasing, whoever's handling this, can now come in and just put a vendor onto it. And so one of the real beauties of this within purchasing workflow is that whoever's handling this process can come and change the vendor. So with the Sage PO module, it's creating a purchase order, which by definition cannot have the vendor changed on it because it's a key field. So that's, I guess, one area where the Sage replenishment process falls down a bit. Whereas here, you know, the purchasing department or the stores department, they might ring up this vendor and say, you know, I want to buy 8 of these calendar pads. Do you have them in stock? They might say, oh no, we're out of stock for whatever reason. So the stores department can then come and, you know, change it to another vendor. So it's a single requisition with many lines, and the vendors can be changed on each line. And then once we submit this into the process, it will now go through another approval process. But because this is a replenishment one, it will, once we get to the end of it, let's push it through all the way. Yeah, because it's a replenishment one, it will know, the system knows to create a purchase order or multiple purchase orders. In fact, let's just have a look. So I can't remember how many vendors, so 3 vendors. So it'll create 3 purchase orders. And so you can see that happening there. So the replenishment one, like I said before, would normally be a much higher dollar value because it's many lines, and the approval process, you know, will normally be different to the storeroom requisition. All right, so that's the replenishment. And actually, just one other thing I just want to just quickly show you in terms of, whoops, if I go into my management inquiry. So let's just have a look at how did it calculate this quantity of 564. So for A1 450, it's 564. And so what the logic there was if we look at our minimums, so the minimum is 500, so it was, oh, in fact, it was below that, so let's just look at that as well. Oh, yes, it's now created a purchase order, right? So sorry, I should have looked at this a bit earlier in the process before it created the purchase order. But the purchase order was for 564, so this quantity on PO previously was 200. So what it did before, let's see, 236 plus 200 coming on purchase order, which was 436. So then it ordered up to the maximum, which was 1,000. So I don't know how good you guys are at maths. Probably better than me. But anyway, 1,000 less 436 is, I think, 534. which is what it generated. So yeah, or something along. So anyway, yeah, that's how it's calculated that. So just to reiterate, it's using the minimums and maximums from IC and using these values from IC lock as well. All right, so that's the whole replenishment side of it. So replenishment, it's under purchasing workflow, but we just sort of thought it was important to cover it because it's not part of the internal issues module, but it's sort of a process that goes in really frequently alongside internal issues. All right, and now there's one other thing that we wanted to show you, which is just the ability to combine items. And so this is a feature that's also for purchasing. So let's just look at that quickly. So sometimes, you know, if you're purchasing pens and paper, let's say if you're buying them from outside, if every time someone does a requisition, you don't want to generate a purchase order. You want to consolidate those purchase orders before they go to the vendor to save shipping costs. So we've just got an example here. So we'll do pens, let's say 10 pens, and paper. So these two items I've set up as consolidate. So I'll say 10 and 20, I submit that. So it's requisition 782. And then we'll do another one. And a different cost center. So we'll do pens, do 30, and then paper we'll do 40. Submit that. So both of these go through an approval process. So go to the division manager. Then they go to the controller. So that's the final approval. So if we now go and look at those two requisitions, if we go along here, okay, I've got some configuration issue, but basically neither of them should, if I had it set up properly, they wouldn't have created the internal issue at this stage. So I must just have my configuration not set up correctly for paper. Oh yeah, I think I know what that is actually. But anyway, yeah, I think you'll see, I can illustrate the point. So now, under internal issues, we've got this process here, create issues from requisitions. And so if we come in here and just run this, what this is now doing, it's looking at all of the internal issues. Sorry, it's looking at all of the requisitions that are for stock items, so in other words, that should be creating an internal issue, and that are for consolidate items, and it's then putting those onto an internal issue order. So if I now come and look at my internal issue order, so you can see here, what it's done is it's created one internal issue order for all of those combined items. So you can see here the paper. So here's the one I did just before, requisition 782 for 20 and requisition 783 for 40. So it's put those two and these other ones onto a single internal issue order. So it's really just letting the stores guys, go out and pick those items and sort of do them in a consolidated process. So. All right, so that's sort of that that's what that function there is for, create internal issues from requisitions. And so it's the corresponding function to under purchasing workflow. You can create purchase orders from requisitions. This is creating internal issues orders from requisitions. All right, so that's, I think, everything that I think we can cover off in terms of a good overview. We do have another question. Does the return open the requisition? So I think an internal issue return opening the requisition, the answer to that is no, it doesn't. It just goes, the return goes back and updates against the shipment. Yeah, in terms of going back to the requisition, we'd need to probably have a bit of a detailed discussion about what the business process is there. I don't think that one's come up from any other customers to date. So yeah, but like always, we're always keen to keep enhancing the solution. So yeah, we're happy to have a conversation about that. All right, so now if we go back to our PowerPoint, so just in terms of the benefits of the internal issues module, the real key one, which I'm sure you'll all be aware of, is just that it enables you to have much better control over your inventory. And we've heard of customers where they've had quite a lot of theft out of their inventory. And so the internal issues modules really allows them to, to sort of control their inventory a lot better. So therefore, can deliver some good financial benefits in terms of reduced theft. Also, yeah, visibility of the consumption. So, if it's not clear, if the inventory is getting depleted, and the company's not sure of who's using it all, then the internal issues module helps improve that. And I guess another benefit is internal issues with purchasing workflow. It gives you a nice sort of process for someone to request an item for that to be approved. Quite a lot of companies will have budget checking, so they have the funds availability module, so make sure it's within budget. The mining industry well, most of them have it set up that way. And then once it's fully approved and it's in budget, then it goes to the stores to say, yes, you can supply those. All right, and yeah, so those are the benefits. And just, I guess, another key thing is barcode scanning. So, anything to do with inventory, barcode scanning's pretty important. So we've had an integration with AccuDart for quite a number of years, where their AccuDart system works in with our internal issues module. And then the other one is with AutoSimply. So we've had some discussions with those guys in terms of their barcoding solution. So we'll hopefully make some good progress on that over the next few months. And in terms of resources to help business partners, so we've got a demo database, we've got pre-sales resources, documents. We're also, Bill and I are more than happy to help you with any pre-sales. And then also, once you do your first project, I think internal issues on its own, it's fairly straightforward. So most business partners can pick it up themselves. If it's mixed, if it's added in with purchasing workflow and you've got the whole workflow approval process, then that's where we're happy to help out in all the cases for your first project. But let's say if you're getting a mining client, and we've got a lot of knowledge around mining and also hotels, so we can sort of bring some of that knowledge to the table. All right, so that's about it for me. So Bill, are you able to keep going from here?
I can do. Thanks a lot, Jamie. So this is just a high-level overview of the Pacifictech modules. We have Advanced Stocktake, which is an extension to IC's current Stocktake and gives you multiple worksheets, the ability to go back retroactively to month ends in various periods. Audit Logger, Big Brother, I think we've talked a few times about, keeping track of various activities after they've happened as an audit trail. Commitment accounting gives you advanced fiscal management reporting and budgetary position. Funds availability is really effective in our purchasing workflow. When you're dealing with procurement, you have cost centers and you can look at your current budget before you requisition more spending or potentially approve it. Internal issues we saw today. Key communications is an advanced module for communicating, sending out documents, having a document log that is a little more sophisticated where you can go back and verify communications have been sent out and resend them quickly, and it's all sent out, like your statements, invoices, and such, all through an HTML SMTP interface. In terms of other ones, we've got our payables workflow. Many of you know about that, and it works also with our AP automation, where you can automate your invoices to vendors, and actually you can automate the input of the invoices through our AP automation. Purchasing workflow works nicely with that, where you're able to do your requisitioning and control your purchase flow and POs. PW Web gives you a lot of control and remote functionality, where you can do web requisitions, for example, on your purchasing workflow. You can do remote approvals on all of these workflows. Vendor catalogs works wonderfully with our purchasing workflow, where you can control vendor supply agreements for pricing, expiry dates, and such, where you can either suggest or actually force people to buy from specific vendors. Workflow documents works with all of our workflows, and is what gives you the ability to attach the documents to these workflows so you can become paperless, and makes it much easier to move documentation around your organization, eliminates the need for a filing cabinet. Workflow notifications, that one covers off on a whole number of other areas in the ERP. It gives you the ability, so you've approved an invoice to be paid, but now after all your invoices approved to be paid, the process of actually approving the check can be done through workflow notifications. So instead of handing over a bunch of documents, the invoices, pieces of paper, and signing off on an electronic transfer or a check, this literally all transfers electronically through the workflow to the person responsible for signing off on the payments. Other things it does is give you control over changes to master file fields, such as vendor bank accounts, so to prevent a fraud, so that somebody can't just change vendor bank account, sending money to, of course, the wrong location. So that can be controlled so that the change doesn't take place until somebody higher authority signs off on it. These are some of the end users that we have using our solutions in North America. We're quite proud of organizations like Atlantic Gold, Dumas, Space Center Houston, Redpath Mining, Mattawa First Nations, CWC Energy Services. We have quite a few verticals that specifically benefit from our solutions, and so you may want to touch base with us to talk about these verticals, because we can help you align with maybe some of your contacts that are within those verticals. I'm here for you in North America as your contact to assist you with product information, and we do have other videos to do with our other solutions, the AP automation, purchasing workflow, expense reporting. So please feel free to be in touch anytime for assistance. And again, we really thank you very much for your time today.